Hello and welcome to FreeThinking Ministries in Review, the month in review. My name is Josh Klein. You may have expected somebody else, but my name is Josh Klein. You may have seen me from this interview, I think, in a post-Christian culture, which is what we really are.
Yeah.
You got to have missionaries, and that's what I see FreeThinking Ministries as. All right. If you have not seen that interview, you can do that in the link below. We got a lot of links below in the description today. I cover cultural and biblical theology for FreeThinking Ministries. I'm not Tim. I have not considered myself a Molinist, so Tim has been gracious enough to have me on. He does call me a mere Molinist, though, because I do affirm that at least one time somebody had a libertarian free will choice, but I digress. I won't be talking about Calvinism, determinism much on this show. Tim's got that covered pretty well. And we'll have some discussions on that. And you can guess where my proclivities lie as far as that concerns. But my goal is to bring you a biblical perspective on social issues. Like I said, I cover cultural apologetics and biblical theology for FreeThinking Ministries. And you may have seen some of my articles written online in the past. My most recent one on a biblical boycott and target got some recent run. I've done a 4-part series on homosexuality and the culture, and that's kind of where my focus is that sort of thing. And so hopefully you've been able to read some of those. But I'll be coming on full time FreeThinking Ministries this July, and part of that is going to be producing this show as well. Hopefully you enjoy it. Let me know if you were confused and concerned by the gray hair instead of the bald head in the comments below. But my goal is, again, to bring you biblical perspective on social issues. We got a little bit of a setup here. It's kind of ad hoc. We're trying to move forward, so bear with us. This is kind of the pilot episode. You're getting in on the ground level, and we'll be seeing how this goes. The format of the show is going to be like this, and I need actually some help because I'm not good at naming things. So I need some help to help me name some things. Right now, it's just FTMonthly or FT Month in Review. I don't know, FreeThinking Month in Review, something like that. So the goal of the show is this. We're going to be looking at top 3 stories of the month. Could be something we wrote. Could be something that just happened in the culture. Could be just something that's a hobby horse of mine. Could be something that Tim recorded. We'll be looking at some of those things here today. So we're going to do a top 3. Then we're going to do a main event, and that's going to be the main thing that I want to talk about. It's my show. I get to choose what that looks like. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today because I think it's important for you to know where my mind is at and how I have these conversations and these thoughts in my own head. Conversation, that's a hint for what we're going to talk about in the near future here. So what would you like us to cover more on this show? Maybe it's social issues, theological issues. Again, Tim's got the Calvinism, determinism, Arminianism, provisionism, Molinism stuff down, and I won't be covering a lot of that, but maybe we will. So would love to hear what your opinion is in the comments. If you've been able to stick around until now, because you see somebody that looks like me and not like Tim, and so maybe you clicked out. Hopefully you didn't, and you're able to give me a shot. Would love to get to know our audience in that way. What would you like to talk about? I've had many requests to speak about CRT, critical race theory. That's something that I've done a lot of study on. In fact, I wrote a review on Dr. Grothice's book, Fire in the Streets, recently. If you haven't read the book, you should go read the book. Neil Shinvey, somebody on Twitter, really smart guy. I don't agree with everything that he says, but he is a good scholar on CRT, and so he's gonna be releasing a book in October that I'm really excited about. So maybe we look at that. I've even had somebody on Twitter, and if you don't follow me, this is a request. Hey, follow me at Josh R. Klein on Twitter. You can follow me anytime you want to see that. So you can follow me on Twitter, but I had somebody on Twitter say, hey, you mentioned something about William Lane Craig's book, The Quest for the Historical Adam, that you didn't agree with. And here's the thing. I have so much respect for William Lane Craig that any of my criticism seems kind of pedantic, frankly. But that said, we could cover that as well. So just what say you? What do you want to cover? I'm going to choose for the most part, but if you want to cover, please comment below. Or if there's a particular thing of interest that you want us to cover on FreeThinking Ministries in general, you can go to freethinkingministries.com and click on that Contact Us page. We'll put a link in the description for that as well. Click on the Contact Us page and send us an email. I had an email conversation with a lady in Arkansas recently just about some things that her son's going through. So do that. We are here to equip the believer and the church to engage with the post-Christian culture freely with the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we want to do that. We want to be available for you as well. With that in mind, let us get to our top 3 here today. First, it is Pride Month. I don't know if you noticed, but it is Pride Month, June. It's winding down. Thank the Lord it's winding down, but it is winding down. And so we've written a little bit about that. Are you aware that June is also Alzheimer's Awareness Month? Yeah, maybe you forgot about that. But it's true. That is one of the things. It's also a Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. We've got months for literally everything. And here's the interesting thing to me about that is Pride Month is also Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So let's see where the two can connect there. That's about all I can say about that. So first, Pride Month. That's going to be our first topic of the day. I wrote about the Target boycott recently and could it be a biblical boycott? And I got a little bit of pushback. That's fine. Love pushback. Love having a conversation. And I want to highlight one of the things that was said here because I think it's important. It was on my personal Facebook page. A friend of mine that I deeply respect and admire, I'm not going to say his name, but he pushed back a little bit on the article, and I pushed back a little bit in response. But now I want to respond in this video about a little bit of that pushback as well. So I'm not going to share his name, but this was a comment that was shared on the Facebook page. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's kind of long, but the general crux of the issue for him was the calling to boycott could be seen as a call to destroy a company because they're sinners. We'll read the end of this. We'll read the end of this quote real quickly. It says, "We're all sinners, but we are to shine as lights in this crooked and twisted generation." Amen. Philippians 2:14. "We do this by being blameless and innocent." Amen again. "And by holding fast to the word of life, not by attacking sinners, no matter how offensive they are." Again, I am really sensitive to this. I really am. I'm sensitive to this way of thinking because I don't want to attack sinners for being sinners. I want to help lead them to repentance, to help them recognize the Holy Spirit's prompting in their life to be led to repentance. So I don't want to attack sinners for being sinners. That said, it does not mean that we acquiesce to sin either. And I want to be clear here. I want to be clear to what I was trying to get at in the article, because the article isn't just about Target's sinned for years. So what's the difference? Target's run by sinners. Everything's run by sinners. So what is the difference between now and then? And I was talking with a friend yesterday about this, and I think it's important to recognize I think it's important to recognize what the difference is. And so I want to look real quickly at a little bit of the article, just some of the stuff that I wrote. And here's what I want to point at. It says, while there's a fuzzy boundary between participating in and funding the sacrifice of the idol of self and simply consuming the product, the boundary does exist. We stand in a unique time in history and economics. We can insist on the status quo set within secularism decades ago based on the Judeo-Christian ethic. Whether these companies realize it or not, they need people with our values to make a profit. So one of the things that he said was, we don't want to destroy a company just because they are run by sinners. Okay, fair enough, right? But my argument isn't to destroy the company. And I know how that quote could maybe be seen as, well, it seems like you're saying they need to recognize that in order for them to thrive, they need you. Yes, thrive is the case. Here's the argument I'm making in that article. Now, I go through some of the history of the United States and what it means to have a state religion, that sort of thing. But the argument that I'm really making in that article is not that we should destroy Target, but that Target is actively participating in a worship service in a liturgical calendar called Pride Month. And that if they do that, perhaps when we are walking in and they are front and center and they are catechizing kids into this ideology, into this new religion, that if they are doing that, then we should not participate in that worship service. This is what I said to my friend yesterday. I said, it's more akin to going into the temple and participating in the sacrifice of the meat to the idol than it is to eating the meat that's already been sacrificed to the idol. So I'm very clear in my article that my call is to say perhaps it is a biblical boycott for the month of June to say I will not participate in this. Now, obviously, there's a boycott of Bud Light too. I've been boycotting Bud Light since it was cool. I don't drink alcohol. That's another conversation for another time. But I don't participate in that one just because it doesn't affect me. But I saw some people doing the same thing. Here's the thing. There's a whole lot of reasons to boycott Bud Light for a myriad of reasons. It's not to destroy the company necessarily, but it is to point out that they are participating in, specifically Target, in a worship, in an act of worship. And this act of worship is the sacrifice of their normal way of doing business to the altar of self and pride. And I won't participate in that sacrifice. I'm not going to go participate in laying the meat on the altar. That doesn't mean that in July, when it's all over and the liturgical calendar turns and all their pride decorations are now, all of a sudden the 4th of July decorations are up. It doesn't mean that, okay, I need to perpetually never shop at Target. But the idea for me is I don't participate in the thing. And then I go in and participate, and I can eat the meat sacrificed to idols because we know it has no power. So let me know what you think. Does that make sense? I don't know. Well, I think it makes sense, but perhaps it doesn't make sense. But that's my argument in the article, is a little bit of pushback. Number two topic today is something that I said we weren't going to talk about very much. It's Tim's video on Calvinism. If you didn't catch it, I don't know why you wouldn't have, but I'll provide a link in the description below to that video as well, and the article that he wrote saying, is Calvinism a different gospel? Now, I know I said I wouldn't talk about this much on the show, but Tim and I had a long conversation just the other day about the video. He asked me what I thought about it, and so I thought I would share with all of you some of the things that we talked about. To me, I said that it's really hard for me to call something a different gospel if we're calling people prospective believers in that system. But I understand why he did it. So the first thing I'll say is, if you're a Calvinist and you're watching this, I'd be surprised. But if you are and you're watching this, one of the things that I would say is try to remove the emotion, okay? And just engage with the arguments that's made. And you could agree or disagree with the arguments that are made. But I told a friend of mine that Tim is arguing against a very specific type of Calvinism. And to be frank, I do think he makes a strong case that it is all types. It is the logical end to Calvinism if you follow down that rabbit hole. But he's not arguing against all types of Calvinism. He's arguing a very specific type of Calvinism that he thinks is the most prominent. Okay. So if you watch that video and you say, well, I don't believe that, here's what I'll say. Well, then it wasn't about you. It wasn't about you. But if you watch the video and you say, actually, I affirm all of those things. Yeah, maybe it was about you. Maybe you've got an issue or you got a problem there, and have a conversation with Tim about that. But one of the things that I said about the video is I really struggle with calling things a different gospel in that realm, and for me, it's a little bit unsettling, but I understand why he did it. I don't think it's just to be provocative. I think it is. So some people might say, well, he's just trying to be provocative. He's just trying to elicit a response, a reaction. I don't think that that's the case. You might think, well, yeah, you work with him. Why would you think that's the case? You're gonna stand up for him. Fair enough. Maybe that is the case. But what I'm going to say is, I think the point is to say this isn't consistent, and calling you to a greater consistency with who you say you believe God is. I think that's what it is. Tim, if I'm wrong, Tim, correct me in the comments below. But so that's my reaction to the video. Maybe that's not the reaction that you wanted, but that's the reaction that I have. So if you haven't seen it, click on the link below and watch it. I think he makes some strong points about a very particular type of Calvinism. It might be the logical end to Calvinism. I know people have rebuffed his exhaustive divine determinism, but as I've been trying to sift through some of those things, I tell you what, there's a lot of differences without distinctions that seem to pop up. There's a lot of borrowing from libertarian language as well that just kind of is a little bit unsettling. I think that's what he's reacting to, and I think he does a good job of laying out the arguments, even if you feel like the tone isn't what you would appreciate. I would say maybe just engage with the arguments. I don't know. That's just me. That's just that maybe is just me. So that's Tim's video. That's number 2 on Calvinism. Let me know what you think. Am I off here? Tim, am I off here? I don't think so. But I will say, I think it's a well-done video. My own personal scruples is like, whenever someone says, well, that's a different gospel, I go, but I know Christians I know they're Christians. One of the things I'll say, I almost forgot this. One of the things I'll say is he's very particular in giving Calvinists the same grace that R.C. Sproul gave Arminians. So I want to throw that out there. He's very specific to say Calvinists are Christians like R.C. Sproul believed Arminians were Christians. It's like a happy coincidence. I can't remember the exact wording. I'm going to butcher it, but take a look at the video. See what you think. If you were emotional about it before, I encourage you, go back and rewatch it. Try to remove the emotions with it and engage with it at an intellectual level, on a biblical level. If you still disagree, let's have the conversation. Would be great to have that, but not on this show, because we're not going to cover that all that much and all that often. But before we get to our third story of the month, I want to invite you to subscribe. If you haven't already, hit that notification bell so you'll see this show and many others as we continue to be active on YouTube. And leave a comment below on the following topic. So topic number 3 of the day is a documentary called Shiny Happy People. I think that's what it's called anyway. I've only watched 2 episodes of this. It's on Amazon Prime. And it follows a family called the Duggars. Maybe you're aware of them, maybe you're not. They were big when I was in college. They were a big thing. They were on TLC. They had a 19 Kids and Counting show because they're a family that had 19 children, 19 biological children, and it follows their family through the show. But one of the things is they're also part of a quote unquote Christian movement, the IBLP, led by a guy named Bill Gothard. And I want to dive into that partly because of where I come from in ministry, and partly because of what I see in the show, and where I think there's some things that need to be pulled apart and nuanced about it. I'm going to provide a link to a guy named Honest Youth Pastor's YouTube channel in the description, because he does a good job. I think it's about a 20-minute video of dissecting the documentary as a whole. But I do think there's a little bit missing from it, just because my history might be able to add a different perspective on the show as well, because I think it is problematic in some senses that the Gothard movement needed to be exposed nationally. The movement that the Duggars were a part of needed to be exposed. But it also gets conflated with Christian conservatism, Christian nationalism in a way that's not helpful. And so I want to help bifurcate that and pull it apart, and hopefully help us sift through that, because I think the documentary doesn't do a great job of that. They do some things that helps you see that, but I think it's important to be able to pull those things apart. Incidentally, I had been in the process of writing a book on a topic like this, specifically the Bill Gothard stuff, and had put it on the back burner for various reasons. And then this documentary came out, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting to pull apart and see what's going on. So if you have seen it, comment below what your thoughts were on it. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you, find someone with Amazon Prime if you don't have it. Maybe purchase Amazon Prime. I don't know. I'm not Jeff Bezos. I'm not advertising for him necessarily, but I will say watch it before the middle of July, because I want to do an episode on that. That might be the main thing the next time we get together and talk here on FT Monthly. So check that out. Shiny Happy People. It's important, and look for that in July. All right, let's get to our main event. Our main event is going to be a discussion that I start with almost anytime I speak on a variety of issues. And it is on the type of conversations we have as Christians in our culture. And one of the things that I do, and none of you really know me, so I'll explain this, is I go places, I talk about identity and stuff like that in Omaha, Nebraska. I've been to Christian schools, been to churches, talk about how to have conversations about identity, especially sexual identity with kids, with your kids, as we look at a culture that's continuously seeming to go down a path that is anti-biblical. And so one of the things I want to do is help parents have good communication and good conversations with their kids around these topics without the explosions. Now, it's not foolproof, but it's one of the things that I try to do. And one of the ways we do that is I dissect the way we interact with people on social topics with 3 different types of conversations. And I want to talk quickly about all 3 conversations. And then you can let me know if you think I'm onto something here, or if you think I'm just completely kooked and I don't know what I'm talking about. So the 3 different types of conversations that we have when we come to especially sensitive cultural topics. One is called the cultural conversation. And the cultural conversation is this. It's like this show, right? It's public, it's out there, it's news, it's podcast, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's on Instagram. There's a cultural conversation, and you're not addressing a specific person or a specific group of people, but you are addressing an ideology or a topic. You are maybe responding to a public article or something like that. It'd be something that Shiny Happy People would be an interesting case study in that regard, because that's part of the cultural conversation. What was this, and what does it mean? The same thing with LGBTQ plus issues. What are these, and how should we think of them, and what is really the truth here? So this cultural conversation, really the 30,000 foot view, and it's public. It's out there. Everyone can read it. They can get back on it. And you want to stay true to the truth and not compromise in those conversations. Okay. We can't do that. We can't compromise. So that's number one. That's the first type of conversation. The second type of conversation is something that we call the social conversation. And the social conversation goes something like this. It's in your community. It's in, maybe it's in church. Maybe it's in the workplace. It's with people that you know, but you're not necessarily close to, and you don't know if they identify with the particular thing that you're talking about. And so you might package it a little bit differently in the conversation you're having with those sorts of people. And when you do that, there's a lot of factors in play that filter down in that conversation. The problem is when we start to confuse the cultural and the social conversation, and we just become abrasive, or in the culture we just acquiesce to whatever, because we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to move the needle as far as the conversation, the Overton window, is concerned. The truth remains the same, but how we have that conversation is different. And then the last conversation is what I call the personal conversation. These might not be the best names for them, but it's the names that I came up with as I was thinking about this. The personal conversation is the conversation you have person to person with somebody or a small group of people about a particular topic, about a particular issue. Maybe you're sharing the gospel with them. Maybe you're talking about cultural issues with them. Maybe you're even talking about politics with that specific person, and it affects them directly. And so when we have this conversation, we're also going to package it a little bit differently. And I think the trouble comes a lot of times, especially in our homes, when we think we're having a cultural conversation or a social conversation, but it's actually a personal conversation. And the way I put it is this. When a kid that's grown up in the church their whole life and has not recanted on their faith, still a Christian, still believes, but they say something like, well, why can't so-and-so live like they want to live? What's so wrong with that? That question is not a question about truth claims. We think it's a cultural conversation or a social conversation question about truth claims. It's a question about, how am I supposed to love this person? isn't letting them do what they want, loving. And then we need to have that personal conversation. So how I liken it is I like to look at how Jesus handled each of these conversations. And one of the ways Jesus handled the cultural conversation is he was very specific about what group he was talking about and talking to. He used stories. He did not mince words. He flipped over tables. He flipped over tables for part of that conversation to say, this is not the way the culture should be. God did not call our culture to look this way. As Christians, we have in America, we have a unique opportunity to be a part of a cultural conversation that helps mold and shape the culture into a God-honoring culture. So that means we can't mince words. That means we can't acquiesce. That means we must stand firm on the truth. But it doesn't mean we sacrifice love either. One of the things I'm fond of saying is truth will always receive hostility, but truth with love invites hostility. Truth without love initiates hostility. Don't be an initiator, be an inviter. Invite the hostility. People hate me for the right reasons. Good. People hate me because I'm me. Not so good, right? Well, depends on what you mean by that. Okay, so how Jesus had conversations with people that were in that cultural context was very different than when he had conversations with his disciples, right? That social conversation he had with his disciples was a little bit more pointed sometimes, but also a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more give and take, a little bit more of a conversation. And when I use the word conversation in each of these realms, I'm talking about just a dialogue of ideas, a dialogue of thoughts, a dialogue of issues, not necessarily a specific conversation. I'm not having a conversation with you right now, literally, but this is part of the conversation, cultural conversation as a whole. And the last conversation, the personal conversation, the way Jesus had it, I like to pull out the example of Nicodemus in John 3 and just say, now how Jesus talks to this Pharisee as a person to person, is much different. Now he doesn't mince words. He doesn't obfuscate the truth. He stays true to the gospel, true to who he is. He tells Nicodemus the truth. But he operates differently than when he's talking to the Pharisees as a whole group. He calls the Pharisees a whole group, a brood of vipers. He calls them as a whole group. He says that their father is Satan. This is some harsh rhetoric, but that's part of the cultural conversation to say, this is the truth. And if you're part of this cultural milieu, you have to recognize that this is the truth. And you can either accept or reject it, but that is the truth. But in the conversation with Nicodemus, he's very specific and intentional about the things that he says and calling Nicodemus to understand and to know and to grow. The issue is when we start to think we have a cultural conversation, but we're having a personal conversation, sometimes we start to be unnecessarily abrasive with a specific person or group of people because we think we're having a cultural conversation, but it's really a personal conversation. We need to recognize that. Or if we're having a cultural conversation and we confuse it for a personal conversation or a social conversation, we could sometimes obfuscate the truth because we don't want to rock the boat. Hopefully that makes sense as I move through these different sections of conversations, just talking here. And hopefully it makes sense. I'll be releasing an article here shortly that hopefully fleshes this out even a little bit more. So one of the ways I want to elucidate this is by using an example that I talked with a friend recently. They talked about an example of a lesbian professor that had written an article against Christianity and had received a bunch of hate letters. But one letter that they had received was a lovely letter that complimented her, but then called her to repentance. And she responded to that one. And I love that example because that example is an example of somebody who recognized the shift in conversation. So she wrote an article. That's a cultural conversation. Now, you are free to write an article in response and be a part of that cultural conversation, that cultural back and forth publicly. You're free to do that. I think it's good to do that. But you're talking about shaping culture there, not about winning the hearts and minds of individuals necessarily. But the people who wrote letters that were unnecessarily abrasive thought they were still having a cultural conversation with a person, with an individual. But the one person who decided to shifts the conversation to personal, recognized that the only way to get in was to share loving care with that person. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work every single time. You're still going to offend people when you're having those personal conversations, but it's a better likelihood of recognizing success when we recognize what conversation that we're having. So not confusing the cultural for the social or for the personal or vice versa. So let me know what you think on that topic as well. Does it make sense? Is it something that you see as well? I'm kind of working that out and want to talk about how that affects what I will be talking about even on this show. This is a cultural conversation show. Will not mince words. Hopefully still loving. But want to talk about that. All right, in conclusion, thank you for joining us, right? It's been great. I'm excited to be a part of this show. Hopefully in shows in the near future, we'll be a little bit more smooth. Maybe the lighting will be a little bit better, but regardless, hopefully you're able to join us for the whole time. Hopefully you don't talk too fast so that you can put this on 2 times speed and listen to it or watch it. We appreciate you. If you want to support the ministry, you can do so by clicking the link below to donate funds. We are a nonprofit. We're seeking to equip the church to engage with a post-Christian culture in freedom, love, and truth. And content like this cannot be made without you guys, without people supporting us. We have about 5,000 subscribers. Man, if 20% of our 5,000 subscribers just gave $20, tax deductible, to the link below, we would be able to do some really cool and neat things. One of the other things I want to bring up as well, Tim Stratton, founder of FreeThinking Ministries, is going to be partaking in a conference in Texas in September. And I just want to be able to share that with you. Take a look at that as well. As you can see, you can register here at texasapologetics.org. Got a lot of great people. Braxton Hunter is going to be there. Tim Stratton as well. Adam Coleman as well. So please take a look at that. That would be great to be a part of it. September 16th in Texas this September. So sign up for that if you'd like. We'd love to see you there. You can see the costs there as well. Once again, it's been great to be with you today, and we are excited to continue our foray into apologetics, cultural apologetics. This has been FT Monthly, and maybe we should name it something else. But until we see you next time, stay reasonable, and God bless.